As we do every week, let's speak to one of the leading thinkers in the world, the best-selling author of books such as The War on the West and The Madness of Crowds, Douglas Murray. Douglas, let's start with the global warming religion, for a religion it is for many, and Greta Thunberg is one of its gods, or should that be Dr. Greta Thunberg, for she is to receive an honorary doctorate in theology from the University of Helsinki. Fitting, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, obviously when some people talk about their university days working to get their doctorate, they mean slaving away in a library or a lab. Only Greta Thunberg can get a doctorate after even absconding from school as a child. But yes, of course, she will be celebrated in every way because she says all of the platitudes that she says and is celebrated by all of the people who agree with her, despite the fact that she's thought through none of these issues. She can't have done, partly because she hasn't spent any time in school. But anyway, I mean, she's got a doctorate, so obviously she's got to be listened to now.
Oh, well, of course, learned indeed. Now let's talk about something great from Sweden and their COVID response. Initially, they were derided by the international media, including the New York Times, as a pariah state and the world's cautionary tale. But Sweden has emerged as the example to follow when the next pandemic hits. Indeed, according to new analysis from the OECD, Australia had higher excess deaths rate during the COVID-19 pandemic than Sweden, which, as we know, never locked down, never closed schools, never forced their citizens into masks outdoors. Will we learn from Sweden?
It's an extraordinary tale, this, Rita, and I can't help thinking that this is going to be one of those things that there will just be denial about at a huge and very deep level for a long time to come. I mean, think of what governments like the Australian government and the British government did. I mean, they completely crashed our economies. They caused our grandchildren to have to pay off debt that we've accumulated, and all for something that it turns out they didn't have to do. The Swedish government took an extraordinary risk in some ways in being the outlier, but on another way, it wasn't a risk at all. They simply weighed up the evidence and came to a different conclusion. But yes, I'm of the opinion, Rita, that this caused so much damage, the reaction to the virus. And it's going to just be impossible for people to admit that that was the case. I mean, just think for the general public. Think what we all went through in terms of privations, in terms of being barred from seeing our loved ones, and much more. I mean, actually, it causes a sort of psychological effect on a population, I think, which means that we're actually reluctant to say, and the opinion polls in country after country show this, are reluctant to say that what we did might have been a mistake.
Well, it's that sunk cost fallacy, isn't it? We invested so much in this drastic response, and it's quite confronting to admit where we went wrong. Now, we're seeing the banking sector on shaky ground in parts of the world, from the Silicon Valley Bank to Credit Suisse, and you wrote in the New York Post about the Silicon Valley Bank and the focus, their obsession, you could say, with things like diversity, equity, inclusion. This was a bank which only had one board member with any banking experience. The rest were mega donors, Democrat donors, including an improv performer. I don't know how that came in handy.
Yeah. I know. Isn't it baffling, Rita? I mean, whenever there's a profession that I'm not involved in, I tend to sort of hope that the people in it have got there through some kind of merit or ability. And you would have thought sort of a bank, particularly a board of a bank in particular, to think, well, that won't just be filled with numbskull political appointees. But there we are. Only one member of the Silicon Valley Bank board turned out to have any particular expertise in banking, or it seems adding up. They had a risk analyst who appeared to be absolutely incapable of analysing risk, and instead spent all of her time talking about how incredibly diverse she was. One of the other hires had come straight from Lehman Brothers, so that must have been a good hire. I mean, the extraordinary thing about Silicon Valley Bank, you were kind enough earlier, Rita, to mention my book, The Madness of Crowds. I mentioned in The Madness of Crowds that one of the reasons why I think our era has been so dominated by the diversity, inclusion, equity nonsense is because entities like the banking sector, after 2008, instead of being held responsible for their actions, as they should have been, ended up slipping away from responsibility by covering themselves in this woke screen. You know, this is why, as you and I have discussed before, banks got involved in the great rainbow people stuff. That's why the investment funds started talking about the environment all the time. It was all a great woke screen to cover for the fact that they didn't know, again, how to do their job.
And it has been a very effective woke screen, because remember we had the Occupy Wall Street days, and that's all disbanded. Yes. They're on the same side now. And whilst we're talking about being diversity obsessed, there's no better example than the Biden administration. And let's have a look at this exchange between Senator John Kennedy and a Biden judicial nominee who doesn't know what a Brady motion is, something you'd expect a first-year law student to know about.
Do you know what a Brady motion is?
Senator, in my time on the bench, I've not had occasion to address that, and so it's not coming to mind at the moment what a Brady motion is.
Do you recall the U.S. Supreme Court case, Brady v. Maryland?
I do recall the name of the case, Senator, yes.
And what did it hold?
I believe that the Brady case well, Senator, I believe the Brady case involves something regarding the Second Amendment.
No, it has nothing to do with the Second Amendment, Douglas. That is a federal judicial nominee. A sitting US magistrate judge does not know that a Brady motion concerns requiring prosecutors to disclose relevant evidence to the defence. I mean, this is basic stuff.
Kennedy is especially lethal in this sort of questioning. He's got an extraordinary skill, which some journalists have and some politicians have, but not many, which is just that thing of asking the very basic question and seeing if the person on the other end of it knows what's happening. Our era is so filled with sort of flummoxery and doublespeak and much more, that one of the things that Kennedy repeatedly does in interviews with nominees, particularly judicial nominees, is this thing of asking the basics. And when you discover that the appointees just can't answer it, you really do start to worry. We saw recently, and I think we talked about recently, the terrible scenes at Stanford Law School, where law students walked out when a judge was speaking and sort of said, we're not listening to this racism, which of course he didn't say anything racist. But anyway, the point is that some of us said at the time, well, this is very worrying. This is the next generation of lawyers. This is the next generation of American lawmakers here. No, that generation is already upon us. They're already upon us. At hearing after hearing, you can see this. And I just pity the people whose lives are going to have any decisions made for them because of people like this who actually, like the appointees in banks and so many other places, don't know their absolute basics. It is embarrassing. They should be embarrassed, but somehow they just glide on through.
And probably will be appointed or probably be passed. And we saw a Supreme Court Justice not long ago refused to answer or failed to answer what a woman is, because again, that was a very simple question a child could answer, but not a Supreme Court Justice. Douglas Murray, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me.
Great pleasure. Thank you.